If you like what you watch, then don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on The Moore Show. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new weekly television and radio shows.
My first guest is barrister and lecturer Anthony Padman. Now, Anthony was born in Malaysia, but moved to the UK to study at the University of Wales, where he graduated with a law degree. He was then called to the English bar and found inspiration for his first book, My Learned Friends, which is written under the pseudonym Karm Arger. Anthony Padman, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin.
Now, Anthony, what's very interesting about your life and the book My Learned Friends is that you were a practicing Asian barrister. So just tell us a bit about your story as a barrister then.
Well, I taught law for a few years in the beginning. Then I went to the bar. And to get to the bar was by no means an easy thing in those days. And I'm talking now, beginning of the 70s. Passing exams was one thing, of course. But then after that, after being called to the bar, you had to serve a pupillage. And this is compulsory. And finding pupil masters, then as now, is very, very difficult. And of course, after having passed your exams and being called to the bar, you were thrown in at the deep end. You sank or you swam. And luckily for me, I was able to swim.
So just tell the audience a bit about the role as a barrister. What's expected of you?
When you have served your pupillage, that means having been attached to a practicing barrister of at least 5 years' call, who has been recommended by his Inn of Court to take on pupils. Well, after having served your pupillage, which is 12 months, you then either stayed with him, if his chambers would accept you as a tenant, or you had to move on and find a tenancy in some other chambers. In those days, of course, all tenancies were in the Temple, and in Lincoln's Inn and in Gray's Inn. So you had to find an established set that would have you in. And that was not easy. It was very, very difficult.
How difficult did you find that? I mean,
extremely difficult.
Yeah.
But luckily for me, I had a very good pupil master. Although he was a tyrant as a master, I appreciated what he had done for me. He worked me very, very hard, but that was to my advantage. And when I left him, his parting words were, well, Anthony, you can use my name as much as you like. And my response was, well, John, I'll use it very liberally, and I have.
So when you passed your bar test, I mean, how many other Asians at the time were sort of passing it as well? Because it's a very difficult test, isn't it?
Yes. Of course, in my time, the exams were set in two parts. There was part one and part two. Because of my degree, I got exemption from part one. And part two were the finals, which is very, very difficult because you're doing something like 14 subjects in 3 days. And it's a massive field to cover. There were other Asian students, particularly the ones from Malaysia that I'm thinking about, but I don't recall any staying back to practice in England. They all went back to Malaysia.
So then, tell us briefly about your book then. Why did you publish this book?
Well, I wanted the people who were going to read that book to have the perspective that an Asian barrister had of the judiciary and the courts as they were then. And I hope I have done that in this book, because an Asian barrister's life in those days was very, very difficult, not only in getting there, but also in finding cases. You see, there are the 3 steps, if I may say so: call to the bar, pupillage, tenancy. Those are the 3 primary steps. Well, assuming you get a tenancy, that means you're paying rent. You have to have income. That means solicitors have to instruct you. And after that, you've got to get your payment in. Solicitors in those days, I suppose even now, are sometimes notorious in making late payments.
So, in general then, I mean, obviously we've got to move on a bit here, but what is the sort of public perception of the law nowadays, would you say, now that you're retired?
The public, I think, with justification, are very dissatisfied with the state of the law at the moment. Not only the state of the law, but the state of the people who actually practice it. You must draw a distinction here between the barristers and solicitors. They perform two different functions. Generally, in my time, barristers, I think, had a much greater general public had a much greater trust in barristers than in solicitors.
Yes.
But I'm sad to say that that is eroding away, especially when you hear about some barristers making enormous sums of money on trivial cases. And solicitors, of course.
Was that the case in your day, do you think, when you were practicing?
No. To be absolutely frank, and I was at the bar for over 30 years, practicing at the bar, I have never known one barrister who has misled me in court. And I've never known of one barrister who has been found to have lied in court.
But is the law fair, do you think?
Well, the law, no. Sometimes it is not fair, but that's the way the law is applied by the courts. And sometimes, of course, judges have a view of the facts to which the law applies. And the general public, of course, might find that unsatisfactory. And that, of course, is rather telling on the layman.
Well, then how powerful are the judges?
Very powerful. Very, very powerful. English judges have virtually an unrestricted power.
Do you have any examples of that? Or?
Yes. In an English court of law, and I'm talking of courts of record now, which means like Crown courts, high courts, courts of appeal, they have almost unfettered power. They run the court, they rule the courts. And barristers are there to present their cases and obey the judge's directions. I mean, there's one particular case in my book where a prosecuting barrister consciously or unconsciously was making a noise in cross-examining a defendant which sounded like sneers. And the defense barrister was so upset he rose to object. And everyone heard this, the sneers, although I don't think prosecuting counsel realized he was doing it. And the jury did. But the judge said, no, I heard nothing. And when defense counsel stood up, said, I heard it, sit down, Mr. I said, just sat down.
Well, do you think judges are biased towards certain people then?
Yes, oh yes. Well, depends on how you interpret the word bias.
Well, and certain people. I mean, well,
Yeah.
I suppose what I mean there is if you're a doctor or some other high-standing authority figure, like a policeman or you know,
yes.
something in those fields, then is there a tendency to be less lenient on them or more lenient?
Judges are more sympathetic towards
More
them, of course.
sympathetic,
Yeah. But bias, if you're using the word in its commonest sense, then I would say no. But if you're using it in its narrowest sense, like for instance, if the judge finds that a defendant who is charged with very serious crimes comes before him and knows that he has previous convictions for similar offences, the judge, and if the defence counsel is quite powerful in his advocacy, the judge might want to go a bit the other way to balance, to redress the balance. And that, of course, can be regarded as bias, but it's not bias in the wider sense, in the narrower sense. One barrister friend of mine said to me, well, judges have to do that to draw the balance. But my response to that was, well, judges, they're there to judge. They're not advocates.
Well, did you ever want to be a judge?
I would have liked to be a judge, and I think I would have been a very good judge. But there were circumstances which really would have stopped me from applying for
What
the post in the judiciary.
would have been those circumstances, do you think?
Well, in my time, I knew that you had to apply for senior judges to recommend you. And I also knew that because of the arguments I've raised in chambers with several judges, that they might not look favourably upon me. And one judge would pass on his comments to another judge, and so on, endlessly. And another judge in a trial that I was involved in had told me, this was quite some time ago,
Yeah.
and he was a High Court judge, that apparently, and I don't know if this is true or not, apparently a senior judge is supposed to keep a book where every barrister over 10 years' call who appears before him, he has to note down in that book about that barrister, how good, how bad, competent, incompetent he is, with an eye to senior
So the
appointments.
judges are judging you in a sense as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, woe betide you as a barrister if you showed any weakness before a strict judge.
So do you think it's easier coming from a certain backgrounds to become a judge? And what would those certain backgrounds be, do you think?
Well, if you were related to a judge, if you came from a judicial family, if you're connected with politicians of high standard, all this helps.
What about if you have a Freemasonry connection?
I'm sorry I have to say that it would help.
Yeah.
Yeah. Coming to Freemasonry, there was one barrister friend of mine, very new to the bar, who wasn't making much headway, who had then asked me whether I could give him some advice. And knowing a little bit about these things, I suggested he became a Freemason. And he disappeared from my ken for some time. When I saw him again next time, he told me that during his initiation ceremony, the person sitting next to him was the official solicitor, and the person sitting on the other side next to him was the Lord Justice of Appeal.
Right, okay.
Now, true or false, that's what he said.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm not accusing Freemasonry here, nor are you, of anything untoward, you know, but always, I suppose what you're saying as well is that, you know, that certain doors open up certain avenues, and, you know, some are easier and some are a bit more of a tough journey.
Yes. Like in most professions, I suppose, even in the bar, it's not really so much what you know, but whom you know.
Well, yes, that's right. And how would you say the bar system is changing nowadays? Is it worse, do you think, or better, or?
I wouldn't say it's worse, but I think it has changed to a degree that it doesn't do justice to the layman. For example, we've got barristers who are being called to the bar, and I may be judging harshly, who in my time perhaps would never have been a success at the bar. Again, you've got the Lord Chancellor deciding on the legal aid budget, cutting drastically on the kind of legal aid that's available in certain cases. For example, in contested divorces, you will never get legal aid. Libel cases, chances are almost impossible to get legal aid.
So then in other countries, is it a better system? For example, okay, America, do you think that's a better system to have the jury as well?
I think so. I think the jury system as it obtains in America is fairer to the defendant, the prosecutor, if it's in a civil case, the layman generally, than it is in this case.
And do you think that, would you think that system might make its way over here perhaps one day?
No, I don't think
No?
so. I think we are so restricted in the way we run our judicial system, we will not accept it.
How different, you know, is the Malaysia law system compared to the bar over here as well, the English bar?
The amazing thing is the Malaysian system, legal system, is supposed to be based on the English legal system. But over the years, it has changed so much that its character is completely different. It is really very rare indeed to see the Malaysian legal system running parallel with the English legal system. Again, in Malaysia, very much it's whom you know that matters, and the law takes second place. And there is, as far as I'm aware, there is no such thing as readily available legal aid in Malaysia as there is in this country. I mean, in this country, if you're charged with, let's say, with a burglary, and you've got no means, the chances are that you readily will get legal aid. You might not get the barrister of your choice, but you will get legal aid. But if that happened in Malaysia, I doubt if you will.
So then, okay, what final piece of advice would you give to people wanting to get into law then?
To become lawyers. Think very carefully before you go to the bar, because to succeed, you really need connections. To succeed, you need a very strong financial background, and to succeed, you really got to know the right people. It's all well and good to say, well, I'm a barrister practicing at the bar, but most people will just starve. Whereas if you're a solicitor, it's completely different. And I have a nephew at the moment who's a solicitor. In fact, he was qualified, he got his degree in Wales, University of Wales. He is now a principal with an American company established in London. And Kevin, you might not believe it, but his gross earnings are nearly 400,000 a year. That's the difference.
Yeah.
And when I was lecturing, I think the last year that I taught law, my earnings were about 18,000 a year. And I gave that up to go to the bar. And of course, the first 6 months of pupillage, you can't earn any fees. But in my second 6 months, I think I earned the magnificent sum of about £350. That's the difference.
Well, Anthony, it's been a complete pleasure to have you on the show today. And we're going to put a link for your book on our website as well. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much.
Don't go anywhere, and we'll see you after the break.
Visit themoreshow.co.uk/shop to purchase products and services from your favourite past guests. If you're new to this site, you can also catch up on the previous television and radio shows through YouTube and the More Show website.